Hi everybody, welcome to this session. My name is Lauren and I'm the session manager for today on this session on environmental change, livelihoods and conflict, chaired by Brenda Akanyi. One moment. Okay, thanks for taking part in ANH 2021. We look forward to an interactive session today. And a quick reminder that everything you need for the conference can be found on the ANH Academy website. Before Brenda takes the conversation forward, I have a few technical announcements just to make sure our experience is as smooth and interactive as possible. So this session is being recorded and will be posted on the ANH Academy website following the conference. All participants have been muted, but please introduce yourselves using the chat function. Let us know your name, where you're joining us from, and your organisation. We encourage you to turn your video on during this session, but if your connection isn't so good, then please turn your video off. Later on, we'll open the conversation to a Q&A. If you have any questions, please post these in the chat box throughout the session, and we'll do our best to raise them during the Q&A at the end. Finally, if you have any technical issues, please check your audio settings and your internet connection. You can always reconnect to the session using the same Zoom link. And if you have any questions, any technical issues, you can send me a direct message in the chat box. So thanks for listening, and over to you, Brenda.
Thank you very much, Lauren, for the introduction. And thank you very much to ANH for hosting this Academy Week. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this parallel session focusing on environmental change, livelihoods, and conflict. We are all aware of the intersection between climate change, environment change, livelihoods, and conflict. And it's unfortunately that the most vulnerable in our communities are the ones that bear the effects of this intersection. So it's extremely exciting to see that this Zoom call is bringing us all together from all corners of the world. And certainly this is a revolution. So for today, we have a fantastic group of speakers from a number of academic institutions. Starting with Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology from Kenya, University of Purdue from the United States of America, University of Reading from the UK, Lincoln University from New Zealand, and the Center for Development Research, University of Bonn from Germany. And we have you, who will be participating actively by writing your observations and reflections in the chat box, and also firing questions in the Q&A as the session progresses. So each speaker, as you heard from Lauren, will be speaking for 8 minutes, and then we shall open up the Q&A session and attempt to answer all your questions if possible. So let me quickly introduce the first speaker. Ms. Esther Wairungi from JUCAT, Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology from Kenya. Her presentation is on the livelihood outcomes of participation in a payment for ecosystem service program in the lovely Mount Elgon Forest of Kenya. Over to you, Esther.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for ANH for organizing this session and also accepting this presentation. So I'll be sharing my screen shortly. I was moving, an apology, I was moving from an unstable position of internet, so I'd request for about 3 minutes to set up my computer. Please, would that be acceptable?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
As Esther is moving around, please continue to put your name, where you come from, so that we can know where we are reaching today. Please let us know your interest in this parallel session. Yes. Esther, are you able to move now?
Just a moment. I'm joining in, so I'll need to be readmitted again so that I don't have two gadgets.
No problem. I'll admit you.
Okay. So as we get ready, I can see there is a lot of participants getting in as well, signing in. Please put your name and where you're coming from or your institution on the chat box. It will help us to really know where you are from and the breadth of the participants in this workshop. Thank you. Yes, I can see so many people from different parts of the world. This is very exciting. It's interesting that at this moment, Zoom has been able to get us all together. And moving forward, I think it will be a very interesting platform to use to engage much more in academic platforms or weeks that normally we would only dream of because of access or having to get on a plane to attend this kind of opportunities. So, well, thanks to Zoom now, we can all get on these platforms from wherever we are. Wow, yeah. We are getting more people joining us. That's very good. Can see people from Indonesia, from Bern. I don't know where that is. Learning to know where it is. Okay. So Lauren, how are we doing with Esther? Or should we ask somebody else to start?
Yeah, perhaps Ramya could start and then we'll come back to Esther when you have your slides ready, Esther.
Okay.
Okay, sure, that will be okay. So we avoid wasting more time, please.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Ram, maybe I will introduce Dr. Ramya. It's okay.
Yeah, that sounds good, thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Ramya Ambikapathy from Purdue University. She's a nutrition epidemiologist studying on the impact of climate variability on food system. And she will be presenting on the effects of climate change events and distress diversification on household food security and children's diets among agricultural and non-agricultural households in India. Over to you, Dr. Ramya.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. I'm presenting this work on behalf of Nilippa Gunaratna and Upasana Ghosh from Purdue University and Public Health Foundation of India. I'm sorry for the long title, but I was trying to pack everything in there. So there are two important contexts to understand Sundarbans. First, Sundarbans is it's known for its dense mangroves. It's known for its biodiversity. It's a tiger reserve. It's a World Heritage Site. It's also undergone tremendous amount of deforestation starting in the colonial era, but it's really accelerated in the last 40 or 50 years. The other important context is that Sundarbans also experience rapid population growth, and it's a sustained nature-based livelihood. So much of this, the population growth really happened in the last 70 years. So when these two things have, these two focus, like the ecological health focus and the human well-being focus, have often come into conflict with each other and have really shaped the perceptions of how you deal with the policies in that area. So by that, so there are people who believe that the focus should be on the forest, that we should not live there. So they do little interventions in terms of livelihood and well-being of the population there. With these two contexts in the background, we wanted to explore how climate events, that's looking at exposure to events such as floods, cyclones, heat waves, rainfall, heavy winds in the last 10 years, and then the effects of those climate events such as salinity, erosion, breaching, loss of crops, destruction of shelter, how these two together affect child diets through various distress coping strategies and vulnerabilities. And for the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on the child diets. We used a mixed methods framework. So from the qualitative side, we used framework analysis using 18 interviews from caregiver and health system providers to look at what their climate shock history and how they responded. And then from a quantitative side, we used survey data that was collected from 1,200 households across 3 islands that with varying exposures to climate events. And we used a structure equation modeling. So the household survey collected information on livelihood, climate change events, coping capacity, food security, anthropometry, and variety of household demographics. Just real quickly, this is the Sundarbans and the Bay of Bengal. There's the India side and the Bangladeshi side, and then this is the islands, the study setting that was sampled. So you can see one of the island, Goramara, is sampled from here. The half of that is in red, indicating they've lost half of their land mass in the last 50 years. The other two the sampling comes from the main island. I start with this quote from the qualitative work. So it says, "Don't ask the starving mass what hunger is. Let us deal with the uncertainty of life first." Quotes like this was very common. This was a common narrative where people have lost land. They have to continue to survive on foods that were coming outside of the island. So they're no longer able to produce, and at the same time, they have to rely on other sort of food systems. And then here, I've arranged the qualitative finding by the island geography. So I'll just go through what Goramara is experiencing. And as I mentioned before, Goramara has lost half of its landmass. It has extreme in terms of climate exposure. And then the effects, some of the effects are waterlogging in the households for months, loss of pond fishing due to salinity intrusion, loss of other agriculture products due to salinity intrusion. So when this happens, when there's a climate disaster, or just a normal, like a climate event after cyclones, people stay in the boat or the embankment for 2 to 3 months, and they build their houses on papers and plastic. So it's very temporary and very unstable environment to live 3 months out of the year. And then we see a variety of different outcomes that women report, for example, suicidal tendencies, cutting down meals, and eating cheaper meals. And in general, during this time post-disaster, there's access to health services and nutrition services are considerably reduced. So I have a quote here from one of the ASHA health workers from Daspara Island. It says, "If I won't reach to them in their emergencies, how will they accept me later? Trust cannot be built like this." So not only there's reduction in access to services in terms of community trust, and the government services also is affected by these disasters. Here I'm showing you the quantitative findings, just the descriptive data looking at the differences between agrofishing households and non-agrofishing households. So agrofishing households generally experience or have a higher exposure to climate events. They experience higher frequency of events. They also have higher number of effects, the climate effects, and then they also report mentioning higher number of distress coping strategies. They do own more land, and then they have less migration of household members. In terms of vulnerability, there are no differences by religion or caste. There is a difference by whether they have a below poverty line card. And in terms of child diets, it's significantly lower. It's 2.7, food groups 2.9. I mean, in general, very low dietary diversity scores. This is out of 7 food groups. And then we see it's really lower among the agrofishing livelihoods, households that practice that. So I'm showing you the results from the structure equation modeling. This is only partial results. So these are the total effects, what we see is that islands with lower climate events and effects have a higher dietary diversity score, which makes sense. Higher climate effects, so experiencing greater salinity, intrusion, destruction of shelter, has higher child dietary diversity score. I'll talk about why that is in a minute. We also see higher distress coping score, agrofishing livelihood. Coming from a marginal caste and practicing Muslim religion is also associated with lower dietary diversity score. And I've highlighted the red lines are negative coefficients and the blue lines are positive coefficients. And I wanted to say that when we built this model, we did it through Zoom session with Dr. Upasana Ghosh, who's done extensive ethnography in this region. So this model was built based on existing knowledge and tested whether it gives a good model fit or not. And then here, I'm showing you all the relationship. So the key takeaway from this is much of this is happening through agrofishing livelihoods. And that's, even in a simpler model, we see that agrofishing livelihood does have a mediating effect. We examine this in the context of mixed effects model, but also in simple linear regression, we see that effect. And then this one, higher climate effects, improving dietary diversity score, is also something that we examined in simpler and more complicated models. So why do we see positive relationship between climate effects and child diets? So people who experience climate events in the last 10 years have lost land, and they sell the remaining land to fund out-migration of male members. There's also greater dependence on daily wage labor. With selling land and migration remittances, women are having more cash on hand, so they're purchasing more from the markets. And I earlier mentioned talking about how the local food systems are changing more to more market-based food systems. So these circumstances appear to give like chronic exposure to climate events and climate effects give a better diet today. But in terms of longer term security, there's lower assets, wealth, and fragmentation of family through migration. In general, the key takeaways from this study is that experience and climate exposure effects varies, and there's a lot of micro variations based on geography, livelihood, and vulnerability. Demographics and risk profiles are changing with changing implications for programs and policies. And from a methods perspective, we were able to understand the findings, at least from structure equation modeling, or it has been contextualized due to ethnography. So ideally, any sort of future work should take longitudinal mixed method study. We really need to address livelihood as a means of addressing nutrition, and this it adds to a lot of literature saying address livelihood as a means of environmental stewardship, address livelihood in terms of mental health. So this adds to that literature that we need to address livelihood as a means of addressing nutrition. And then finally, we would like to, Bhushan and I have been talking about proposing a long-term climate safety net that addresses all the different challenges in Sundarbans. Is one that integrates health and food systems. We have some ideas what that might look like, and we're happy to discuss more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ramya, for that very succinct presentation of your research findings. So participants, please keep on firing your questions in the Q&A section and your reflections and observations in the chat box. So moving to our next presenter, I don't know if Esther is ready. Esther, are you ready? Esther? Okay. So we are not hearing from Esther at the moment. Mr. Fadare, are you able to jump in?
That's fine.
Okay. Oh, super. Thank you. I'll just quickly introduce you, and then in the meantime, try to put your presentation on so that we don't lose time. Is it okay? Okay, good. So our next speaker is Mr. Fadara. He will also quickly pronounce his name. He's an agricultural development economist with main research interests in looking at the drivers of food and nutrition insecurity in Africa. Currently, he's a PhD candidate at the University of Reading. His presentation is on the seasonality of conflict and livestock production, effects on micronutrient and diet adequacy among Nigerian households. Over to you, Mr. Fadari.
Thank you for that introduction. And I will just quickly go straight to my presentation. African countries in conflict situation. African countries in conflict are faced with serious food and nutrition challenges. More importantly, the population of women and children that are at risk of micronutrient deficiencies. And these populations are more concentrated among agricultural households, though agricultural households build resilience to conflict and devise food consumption coping strategies, but this may not be sustainable in conflict situation. Agricultural production in Nigeria, the country of studies, largely depends on rainfall and subsistence in nature, hence the vulnerability of household to seasonality of agricultural production and extreme weather and conflict events. The off-season and the on-season has their peculiar characteristics and they affect household food consumption in different ways. Protracted conflict may take seasonal pattern and align with seasonality in agricultural production. And this may make households to experience 2 seasons of inadequate dietary intake or malnutrition. Studies suggest that seasonal pattern in weather events and seasonality in agricultural labor are among key drivers of conflict. And so study has also shown that conflicts have effects on the food consumption of agricultural household and nutrition. But some of these studies are not, they've used cross-sectional data and have not taken into account seasonal dimension of conflicts. So our research objective is to examine seasonal pattern of violent conflict in Nigeria and to assess the effect of seasonality of conflicts on animal source food consumption and dietary diversity among livestock holding household in Nigeria. So for the first objective, we use the armed conflict location and event data set covering period from 2009 to 2019. And we have 2,737 panel observation of local government. And we use a number of months of January to December with conflict events within local government from 2009 to 2019 as the main determinant of violent conflict and farmer herders conflict in Nigeria. We control for other variables like geopolitical zone. For our second objective, we use the living standard measurement study integrated survey on agriculture and harmonize this with the conflict data set. And our outcome variables are household consume animal source food, which is 1, if household consume at least once within 7 days, and household diversified diet, which is 1, if household consume at least 8 out of 12 nutritionally distinct food groups. And our main explanatory variable is seasonality of conflict, which is agricultural season interacting with conflict exposure. Our agricultural season is post-harvest and post-planting. And we use a linear probability model with difference in differences estimation strategy to identify causality. And as such, our post-harvest season is the treatment period, while conflict exposure is the treatment. And this was informed by our result of seasonality of conflict model. And this is the result of the association between agricultural season and conflicts. And you can see that in post-harvest season has positive association, strong association with violent conflict, while post-planting season has no such association or have negative association, especially farmer herders conflict. Then these are the result of the seasonality of conflict and livestock production on animal source food consumption and also dietary diversity. The main result here is that violence conflict exposure during post-harvest reduces animal source food consumption and reduces it more for households that are exposed to farmer-herders conflict. Also, poultry contributes more to animal source food consumption than other livestock production. Also, violent conflict reduces dietary diversity in post-harvest, though post-harvest shows that also consume more dietary diversity. So to conclude, there is seasonality of conflict in Nigeria during this year under review, especially farmer-herders conflict, and they align with agricultural seasons. Also, diversified diet in post-harvest season, but conflict exposure limits such consumption pattern. Livestock production may not sustain adequate diet for households across season in conflict situation, though studies have shown that livestock can support also during lean season and during shock, but this may not be so in conflict situation. Production of other micronutrient crops, such as vegetable gardening, should be encouraged to complement stable diet of most agricultural households in Nigeria. Especially, we found that vegetable consumption was high among households that were exposed to conflict. What are the policy implications? Mainstream climate change adaptation into livestock production system to reduce conflict associated with extreme weather events. And this is because the post-harvest season in Nigeria also is the peak of dry season. And studies have shown that drought has positive correlation with conflict. And again, this may also cause conflict between farmer-herders that compete for limited resources. And increase off-farm job opportunity for rural youth to reduce the incentive to join violent group during season of low demand for agricultural labor. We go a long way to reduce conflict as youth becomes engaged during off-season of agricultural production. Also, targeting micronutrient intervention program towards critical month or season of inadequate diet intake in conflict affected region is very critical, because in conflict region, in conflict situation, most intervention goes towards severe acute malnutrition, and micronutrient deficiency are often overlooked because they are not visible. And more research should examine food consumption of agricultural household in conflict situation and incorporate seasonality dimension to improve understanding of seasonal food consumption vulnerability of agricultural household. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fadare, for that very interesting perspective from the conflict perspective. And also really bringing in the implication for nutrition within health in terms of the micronutrient intervention. Participants, keep on jotting your questions, reflections in the chat box and the Q&A session. Thank you very much again, Mr. Fadare. Next, we will have now Esther. Are you set now?
Yes, I'm set.
Okay, super. So please take it away, because I had already introduced you. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Let me just share my screen immediately.
Yeah, as she's sharing, just to remind for those participants that are just joining in, Esther is from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology from Kenya. She's passionate on agriculture development and establishing resilient ecosystems. Her presentation is on the livelihood outcomes of participation in a payment for ecosystem service in Mount Kenya Forest, Kenya? Yeah, did I get it right?
It's Mount Elgon, but it's okay.
Mount Elgon, sorry. I'm so sorry about that.
So, okay, thank you everyone for joining in. So Brenda has already introduced this. We're looking at the livelihood outcomes of participation in PES in Mount Elgon Forest, Kenya. So we did this with my colleagues and very supportive supervisors, Robert Mbeche and Josiah Teka. So straight to the background, we know that forest ecosystems all over the world provide a range of services, which include provisioning, support, regulating, and cultural services. So these include food, they include also other aspects of recreational aspects that anyone around the forest ecosystems or who enjoys them gets to benefit from. And these ecosystems are at a risk of loss due to the high degradation rates as reported by a report by FAO 2018. And now the high degradation poses a risk to the livelihoods of the forest communities living around these regions. So what's next? We need to find a balance between how to keep improving the forest ecosystems while also supporting the livelihoods of people who live around the forest areas. And to do this, one of the ways that has been championed is through the use of incentive-based conservation approaches. And one of these now is payment for ecosystem services, such as the one we are looking at. So payment for ecosystem services allows households to somehow benefit, or they're given incentives that allow them to continue improving or to engage in restoration activities of forest. So we get a sort of dual benefit where there's livelihood improvement and there's also ecosystem restoration. So the nature of the program in Kenya is that the farmers are allowed plots within the degraded areas. So they cultivate, but at the same time introduce the plantation forests. So in this case, the crops that they plant, they are the ones who get the benefit. So these do not go back to the government. They benefit the individual households that have been allocated these plots. So this acts as an incentive for them to continue restoring the degraded lands. So our research objectives are to now evaluate the effects of this program on households' food security levels and also on the income levels of the households around the Mount Elgon Forest Reserve, where this program has been implemented in Kenya. We're going to assess participation now as a binary, where we have participants and non-participants in this program. Then we're also going to look at the impact on food security. So food security will be measured, using the FIES scale, then the HDDS, that is the Dietary Diversity Score, and the food consumption expenditure. Then the effects on income will be assessed using income accumulated from all household sources. Then we also use propensity score matching to estimate the average treatment effect. That will allow us to go closer or in more details to understand how now does this program affect these people's income. Then we'll also check the distribution effect of participating in this program. So our survey was in Mount Elgon, as stated earlier, and we sampled 919 households, some involved in the program with another section not involved in the program. So we selected forestations first, 3, then also randomized 30 villages in the 3 forestation and narrowed down again to villages and households now from the list provided by the village heads. So these are the analytical models, the PSM and the quantile regression model. So to our results, we first show the food security levels, comparing the participants and non-participants. So the graph, the screen now shows us the variations in the various levels of food security across the participants and the non-participants. So we're able to see that those who are non-participants in this program have the highest level of severe food insecurity. Then we also see that the participants have the highest when we check the food secure households. So we can begin to see the effect that this program has even before we go into the finer details using the PSM. Also in HTDS, we are able to see the diversity of the groups. For non-participants, they only have groups, they only consume food groups between 1 type of food group to 9, while for the participants, it starts at 4. So we can begin to see that participants in this program are able to access or are able to have more diverse food groups compared to the non-participants. Also, we present the results on food consumption expenditure. For the participants, if we compare the participants and non-participants, we're able to see that a large percentage of the non-participants are very vulnerable. For the participants, still the highest proportion is very vulnerable, but they are still lesser than the non-participants. So this comes to show that most of the non-participants still spend a higher proportion of their income on food, which shows then that there is a bit of problem for the non-participants. So using the treatment effects, we show the effect of participating in the PEST program on food security using the 3 food security measures and also income. So using the FIS score, the one that shows food sufficiency, we're able to see that households that participated in this program have a lesser score compared to the non-participants, indicating that they are more food sufficient compared to the non-participants. In terms of the HTDS, it's not significant. So if we go, but still from the graphical results, we saw that the non-participants for the food expenditure income. So we link it up with the food expenditure. For income, the non-participants, benefit from the program by getting about 22,810. That's approximately 217 USD dollars from participating in this program. And this can be equated to about 37.7% of the annual amount spent on food. But now here we see some unexpected outcome, because in terms of food expenditure, the households, the participating households do not seem now to spend more of this income on food. So the question is, why is it then that they get more income, but this is not translated to the spending on food, that it makes them more food secure? So this is something we need to think about going forward. So what is it that then they spend their money on once they get it? Because we expect that in such a setup, the most immediate needs are food. So this is something we'll continue thinking about. So the quantile regression, I've highlighted various variables in different colors. So the main one is this PELIS program. Across the various quantiles, that is 9, we're able to see that PELIS has a positive impact on the income. So this is confirmed even from the PSM results that we've presented earlier. Then we can see also that asset variables, that is the second set highlighted in brown. We have number of livestock, of income, asset value, and yearly expenditure. They also influence the income that is derived from PELIS. Reason being, most wealthy households, as defined by these variables, are able to participate more in this program compared to those that are lesser off. So this would be one reason as to why they are able to derive more income. Also, we have another set of variables highlighted in blue: shocks, distance to road, and forest extraction. These would be hindrances to these people getting more income. So we also wanted to check whether they affect the income levels of the households. So for the first quintile, shocks value positively affects the income level. So those who incur higher shocks are able still to benefit more, because this program acts as, let's say, as, what do we call it? It helps, it's a buffer for these households. So once they have something that can cover up what they are suffering from, then they're able to get more income. So still on a broad aspect, we are able to see that these quintiles benefit, there's an equal distribution of the benefits that come from this program. So it can be loaded for one, that it has equal effects. It doesn't like focus on maybe the wealthy or mostly the poor. So still its continued implementation would benefit all levels of people in these forest ecosystems. Then it's also key to note that still the wealthy people in this setup are able to benefit more. And also the wealthy are able to participate more, hence benefit more. So what are the key messages that we take from this? That PELIS has a positive effect on food security, especially the food sufficiency dimension. It increases households significantly, and key to note, I repeat this, that this amount that they benefit from is sufficient to enable them cover their food expenses up to 37.7%. Then the scheme is equitable. There is equal distributional impact of the incomes. And we are able to see the double benefits that we hypothesized earlier, that there is ecosystem restoration as well as livelihood improvement. Then also a major policy implication is that involving these people now in restoration of forests helps to improve food security, increase income, and reduce poverty, hence, and also enhances equality among households. So thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Esther, for that very clear presentation from the environment side, and also in terms of getting the incentive for communities to engage more with their environment. Thank you very much. Now, moving to our next presentation, which is the last one, I think, because the other presenter is not able to.
I'm here.
Oh, she has joined, so we have two more.
Oh, super! This is very good news, and thank you so much, Amaka.
Amaka, yes.
Amaka, we know it's really in the middle of the night, or yeah, so we really appreciate your time and your dedication to present. So yes, so our next presenter, as she's putting her slides on the platform, I'll just introduce her again. Amaka Nanji. She's currently a PhD student at the Faculty of Agribusiness and Commerce at the Lincoln University in New Zealand. She will be presenting on the determinants of the risk perception of farmer. I don't know if, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, my internet kind of went off a little bit, sorry. So Amaka will be presenting on the determinants of the risk perception of farmer-herder conflicts. This is evidence from rural Nigeria. Over to you, Amaka.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Can you see my slides? Is it up now?
Yes, maybe you could put it on kind of...
Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'll just go straight into the presentation. So for the background and motivation of the study, of recent, the effects of climate change has been on the increase. So we have rising temperature, drought, and the resulting desertification. And then there's also been rapid population increase with the resulting intensification of agriculture. And all this has led to increased competition for land resources by nomadic herdsmen and crop farmers, resulting in what we call farmer-herder conflicts, as Mr. Shegun made mention in his presentation. So these conflicts are a major problem in most of the developing world, has led to the loss of lives, destruction of property, and displacement of people. So in the literature, you have more work on armed conflict, and nothing much has been done into understanding the dynamics of farmer-herder conflicts. So most of my thesis do that. So 2 other papers have.
Hello, Amaka is frozen. Hello.
Yes, I think she is frozen, but she's still online. Amaka, could you try turning your video off?
So these are the joys of the platform. So as we wait for Amaka to be unfrozen, please keep on jotting your questions and your question reflections in the chat box and the Q&A chat box, please.
Perhaps we so I think she's just dropped off the call. She's probably trying to reconnect. So we
get Emily on if
that sounds good.
Is available. Emily, are you okay to?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Please load your presentation on the platform as I introduce you.
Okay.
Great, super. So I really like the kind of flexibility with all our speakers and all the participants within this challenging times and the platform that also gives us the opportunity to engage. So our next speaker is Emily Amondo, currently a PhD student in development economics at the Center for Development Research, University of Bonn in Germany. Her research work is on climate variability, agriculture, nutrition and health and welfare. And she will be presenting on the gender gap in health outcomes among the working age individuals. And the question is, does weather effects play a role? Over to you, Emily.
Okay, thank you, Brenda, for the introduction. Nice introduction, really. Okay, welcome everyone for my presentation. I'm Emily Amondo, as you've heard, and I will take you through my presentation, Gender Gap in Health Outcomes Among the Rural Working Age. And I ask a question, does weather effects play a role? In my presentation, I will try as much as possible to focus on both men and women, because most of the gender factors, they affect, they are harmful to women's health and also to men's health. So this is just an outline of my presentation, but I'll go straight away to introduction, where I'll give a brief background on gender and health. Yeah, it's important to understand this before we bring in the climate issues. So both gender and health are gender equality and health are fundamental human rights in the SDGs, with synergies between them, because health is important for development and enhances resilience and coping ability from natural disasters. And on the other side, we see also gender equality matter for economic growth and development. What World Bank indicates that it's smart economics. Achieving high level of gender equality is smart economics. And also the WHO recognizes gender as a key determinant of health. And it enhances also improved food and nutrition security, lowers fertility and child mortality, and for peaceful societies. So there are different pathways in which gender is translated into health risk. For instance, the differences in vulnerability and exposure to diseases, injuries and disabilities, and differences in health behaviors, which are mostly dictated by gender norms, discriminatory values and beliefs, and also gender roles. For instance, gender roles determine where men and women spend most of their time. And it's actually a key determinant of the different exposures in on infectious agents between men and women. And also the multiple roles on the side of women and caregiving roles on the side of women And on the side of men, the breadwinner roles, risk-taking roles, and masculinity are all sources of health risk. And climate come in by exacerbating the already existing gender health inequalities in men and women. For instance, it all starts with when climate affects food and water, and the individuals that are responsible for these activities, of course, they'll be facing difficulties and high burdens in meeting the livelihoods, also the caring burdens, the water collection activities, and all these things are translated into health risk. There are also direct ways in which weather affects health through different elements such as waterborne diseases, water-wash diseases. All those are as a result of climate or weather extremes. WHO gives the pathways through which climate is related to different health risks of the different gender groups. So my research question is to find out what is the effect of rainfall and temperature variability on health of both men and women. And I go further to look at the association between healthcare services and health outcomes of men and women. I look at healthcare services because they indicate that the vulnerability of different individuals to the effects of climate is because of weak differences in health system, also poverty and related issues. And I go further to determine if there is a gender gap and if weather effects actually play a role in the contribution of healthcare services. So my study area is in Uganda. Uganda, of course, is East Africa, and I give 100 time period differences in annual rainfall and temperature from 1900 to 2016. And as we can see, rainfall and temperature has not been stable in Uganda. Yeah, but on average, Uganda receives an annual rainfall of around 1,200 and temperature of around 22 degrees Celsius. Monthly rainfall and temperature also, there's differences. For instance, the hottest month in Uganda lies between January to March and the coldest June to August, while the months with the highest rainfall is April, May, and June, and August, September, and October. So I use different data sources. My health data comes from Living Standard Measurement Studies, ranging from 2009 to 2014, and I use a pool sample of around 22,000 individuals in the working age. Working age is between age 15 to 64 years. And the good thing with the data sets is for this time periods, the locations were geo-referenced and the information was provided, which enables me to get my rainfall and temperature data. My rainfall, I get it from CHIPS, and temperature, I get it from MODIS. I use this data to construct my variables of interest, which is negative rain deviation, which is a dummy variable if annual rainfall, the differences between annual rainfall in the respective interview year from the mean was less than 0, and positive temperature if the differences was greater than 0. I also focus on short-term measures like temperature and rainfall in the month prior to the interview, because the different health outcomes were collected on a 30-day recall period. So I show some of the descriptive statistics between men and women, and we can see there are significant differences. For instance, most of the women were older and they had less years of education. They dominated lower income categories, and they were mostly involved in farming. In terms of health services, more women used the treated mosquito net, 42% as compared to 37% in men, and they visited government hospital centers. They preferred visiting government hospital centers for treatment or consultation, and they traveled for longer distance, while men mostly, they visited private doctor or hospital or pharmaceutical or a drug shop arrangement. And one explanation that we could give, because women have low socioeconomic status in society, and most of the health services in government hospital, I think the user fee was waived in Uganda, so they try to access these health services from government hospital. But then the preferred mode of treatment, of course, or consultation in Uganda is mostly private. So for the health outcome, we found that more women were ill. For instance, 36% suffered from an illness as compared to men, and they spent more days of illness as compared to men. And again, a high proportion of women stopped, they were unable to do their usual activities because of the illness, and they spent more days, of limited or restrictive activities. Over the years, we see the bars in female or women are still higher than in men, even though over time there is a declining trend, at least in illness. For my empirical strategies, I use two-parts model, which enables me to get the effect of weather events at extensive margin, that is the probability of illness, intensive margin, that is the number of days of illness conditional on being sick, and the overall effect on the days of illness for the overall sample. I use logit and the first part, and GLM or negative binomial in the second part. And apart from this, I conduct an linear decomposition analysis so as to quantify the health inequalities that will be eliminated if men and women were given the same covariates. So these are some of my results from two-parts model. We see that low rainfall below the long-term mean increased the probability of illness in women by around 8.3% percentage point, and in men it was around 6.7 percentage points. We also see low rainfall increase the days of illness for the whole sample in female by around 1 day, and in men it was around 0.37. On the contrary, we see that high rainfall reduced the probability of illness in men. And perhaps this could be because, men are usually breadwinners. So if there is a high rainfall and they are able to meet they are able to provide for their families, perhaps that could explain why there is less probability of illness. And then we see that temperature, both measures of temperature, they increased the probability of illness in both men and women in terms of days of illness. For the workday lost, we find that we find the same result, even though the magnitudes of coefficients are a bit lower. For instance, low rainfall increased the probability of work-related absences by at least 5 percentage points, and the magnitude of effect was, of course, higher in women than in men, a difference of 3 percentage points. In terms of association between healthcare services and days of illness, for those who are sick, we find that distance to the health facility increased the number of sick days in both men and women, and the men who visited different healthcare arrangements, they significantly recorded less number of days, but we did not find that effect in women. But for the workday lost, we find that women who sought consultation, they spent less days of work days missed because of illness. So for our decomposition analysis, we find that for all the covariates that we control for, we can only explain 27% to 34% of the differences in men health gap in terms of likelihood of illness and stopped days of restricted activities. And we find the proportion of overall health gap that we can explain for the days of illness at the intensive margin is a bit higher, for instance, 28% and 40%. What does this coefficient mean? They indicate that if we reduce, if we equalize the covariates in men and women, we are able to reduce the inequalities in the number of days of illness by up to 40% in terms of what they lost. And then we find for a detailed decomposition, we find that differences in age, education, marital status, and temperature, they are the ones that explain most of the health inequalities. That is for the regressions without health facility or health services. But if we consider, if we include the health covariates into our model, we find that now we can explain a high proportion of the health inequalities in terms of the number of days illness. Actually, the endowment component doubled to around 54% as compared to 27% without healthcare variables. So implication of illness on dietary diversity, we find that the blue line shows individual who spent less than 15 days out of the 30 days they were asked for, and the maroon one shows individuals who spend more than 15 days of illness or stopped working because of and we find that individuals who spent more days, they have significantly lower dietary diversity as opposed to those who spend less number of days, both for men and women, and both for days of illness and for the workday lost. So we conclude by saying whether anomalies matter for health and for men and women, and more so in women, especially when it comes to low rainfall events, and healthcare indeed matter a lot in the reduction of number of days of illness and number of workday lost. And the health-seeking behaviors, the differences in health-seeking behaviors between men and women, was the main source of the gap in terms of days of illness and also income. So we recommend improved access to quality health care, especially to women, and women empowerment in terms of income, education, and time poverty reduction strategies, I think, will help in reducing the health gap. Our data had some limitation. For instance, of course, we used weather data at enumeration areas opposed to places where individuals spend most of their time, but this is what we could get. And also the health data was only for 30 days, as much as we had weather data for a long period of time, but health data, the recall period was just 30 days, and it was collected on symptoms rather than diseases. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emily, for that very interesting presentation, bringing in the gender perspective and the health-seeking behavior linked to climate variations. Thank you very much. Participants, please keep on firing your questions and filing your observations in the chat box. Now, we have the last presentation. Amaka finally got back. So we'll quickly roll on it. Time is now not on our side, but I'm sure Amaka will get her presentation clear and succinct. Thank you. Amaka, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really sorry for that. My connection, went off. So, can you see my slides now? Hopefully you can.
Yes, and your sound's very clear.
Okay, thank you. So the objective of the study is to determine the factors that influence the rural households' risk perception of farmer-herder conflicts. So, based on literature reviewed on risk perceptions of climate change and hazardous events, Figure 1 here shows the conceptual framework of the overarching factors influencing the risk perception of farmer-herder conflict. And here we model farmer-herder conflict, the risk perception of farmer-herder conflict, as a function of socio-demographic factors, farm-level characteristics, as well as households' past personal experiences of farmer-herder conflict. Yeah, so the study was carried out in Nigeria, a country in Western Africa, or using primary data collected between May and June 2019. A multi-state sampling approach was used to sample households for the study. In the first stage, 2 zones, 2 states in each zone, and 5 local government areas in each state were proposally selected on the basis of a prior occurrence of farmer-herder conflict. And in the second stage, towns, villages, and households were randomly selected, making a total of 401 households in the survey. So based on the model presented earlier, ordinary least square regression models were specified to determine the factors influencing households' risk perception of conflict. And risk perception of conflict was modeled as a function of the following variables. So household head, household characteristics, farm level characteristics, as well as past experience of conflict. So moving on to methods, we use exploratory factor analysis to construct an index for a risk perception variable. So households were asked several questions on how worried they were about certain issues regarding farmer-herder conflict, as shown in figure 2 here. The response categories for all questions ranged between extremely worried to not worried. So moving on to further probe the differences in risk judgments and the source of their perceived risk in more detail, the 9 risk perception items were split into 2, and we constructed 2 sub-indices of the risk perception of farmer-herder conflict as it concerns food production and supply, and on one hand, and on the other hand, physical insecurity and well-being. So the Chromac alpha for all 3 indices indicates the skills are constructed are reliable. So table 1 here gives a summary statistic of key variables. I'll continue, yeah. Table 2 presents mean differences in explanatory variables by gender of household head. And from the last column, we can see that female-headed households and male-headed households were significantly different in most key variables. So moving on to main result. So table 3 presents 3 models of risk perception of conflict of factors influencing risk perception of farmer-herder conflict. Model 1 is estimation results for the equation presented earlier with all our key variables. Model 2 incorporates all variables in model 1, but then is inclusive of the number of farmer-herder conflicts that occur in their communities. Model 3 includes all models in all variables in model 2, but it includes an interaction variable between the number of conflict incidences and gender of household head. All 3 models passed the reset and link tests, indicating correct model specification, absence of omitted variables. All models had an R-score higher than 40%. So in general, our findings, our results show that the age of household head, farm size, the migration status of the household, and exposure, having formal title to land, as well as an exposure to farmer-herder conflict were negative predictors of the risk perception of conflict. While on the other hand, farming experience of household head, the number of households, languages, number of languages spoken in household, crop and livestock diversification, distance from the household to their closest neighbor, as well as being located in the North Central geopolitical zone, all had statistically significant positive influence on the risk perception of farm-herder conflict. Well, an interesting and insightful finding, I would say, for policies that is that of the interaction between gender and number of household head of farmer-herder conflict, rather. And this shows that an extra occurrence of farmer-herder conflict, with an extra occurrence of farmer-herder conflict, female-headed households had significantly higher risk perception of farmer-herder conflicts compared to male-headed households. Moving on, table 4 here presents some results of all 3 indices, risk perception indices we constructed, and results show that age of household head, the number of languages spoken in the household, migration status of the household, as well as an exposure to farmer-herder conflict were more important predictors of the risk perception of conflict as it concerns food production and supply. While on the other hand, education of the household head, household size, household income, livestock diversification, as well as the distance from household to the closest city were more important predictors of the risk perception of farmer-herder conflict regarding physical insecurity and well-being. So in conclusion, age of household head, farm size, possession of formal title to land were found to make households more secure, and in that process had a negative and significant effect on their risk perception of conflict. While among the positive predictors, an interesting result would be that of the location. So the location, in this estimation, the location was a binary variable that takes value of 1 for households located in North Central zone, and it had a positive influence on the risk perception of conflict. And it's interesting because this region is like the agrarian region where most of the produce are produced, most of the cultivation in Nigeria occurs, and it also has the most occurrence of farmer-herder conflict. So for policy implications, our findings have, of course, has implications for governmental and non-governmental agents that are willing to influence the risk perception of rural households. And findings recommend the enactment of policies, for example, land policies that address the issues of land titles and tenure security, as well as encourage a more gradual shift to sustainable herding systems. And also, our findings recommend strategies that improve farmers' capacity to cope with farmer-herder conflicts. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that very clear, succinct, short, nice presentation to get us to the end of the speaker's presentation. And also thank you for bringing in that additional aspect of conflict that also adds into the insight that Dr. Fadere also, Mr. Fadere also presented. So we have some 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get into the Q&A section. I will just quickly check the Q&A questions. Yes, most of them have been answered directly. Is there any other question that is coming up? Lauren? I just checked, all the questions are being answered. Is there any?
Okay, well, if anybody has more questions, you could unmute yourself and ask them verbally. I've just changed the settings. If you have any questions, you can also use the raise your hand function to indicate you'd like to speak, but it would be great to hear your voices.
Yes, super. So as we are creating that appetite, maybe just some few questions to Esther for her presentation from Kenya. I think her colleagues are here. Or did she leave? Okay. She leave. Okay. So maybe then I will go to Mr. Fadare. I'm just wondering what kind of micronutrient interventions would you be suggesting in line with your research for the kind of nutrition or health stakeholders that are in this area of conflict? Is there any specific one that you are recommending, or it's just a general micronutrient interventions?
Okay, thank you. Like I presented, because livestock production are particularly vulnerable to conflicts, and vegetable gardening is one option to substitute or to complement staple diets in Nigeria. And of course, they can easily be grown at backyard. And of course, fish also, our study also shows that fish and also that are exposed to conflict also consume more fish than also that are not exposed, and they also consume more vegetable than also that are not exposed. So fish is one, and vegetable gardening is another. And of course, small livestock species like poultry, and also as you can see from the results, they also contribute to animal source food consumption, and these are micronutrient dense food products.
Okay, yeah. Great. Thank you so much for that clarification. I'm seeing more questions now. The appetite is coming up. To Amaka, we have a question. Could you tell us a little bit about the current conflict resolution strategies within the communities you have studied?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Claire. What we find, at least what I found when I did the survey, because I did a primary, I used the primary data. You find that a lot of the time, when these conflicts break out, they usually go to the chief, the what to call it, the chief of the communities to kind of try to resolve these conflicts. And if they're not able to resolve it peacefully, then they involve the police most of the time. That's yeah. So that's what happened. But sometimes it escalates so fast that there's no time to actually like have peace talks at the chief's house. It becomes a really big problem then, and then it becomes violent and it goes downhill from there.
Okay.
Could I just ask a quick follow-up to that?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just in terms of your data then, when you're sort of recording the conflicts as, like how are you identifying whether there's conflicts or not? And is it that they've escalated beyond going to the police, or would it still count as a conflict in your data set if, if it's very minor and it had been resolved, via the chief, for example?
Yeah, so the farmer-header conflict I captures both violent and non-violent conflict. So
sorry for that yeah, this is the reality now with the online platform. We'll follow up. Is she back?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I had no idea. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so for my study, we capture both violent and non-violent farmer-header conflict, because whether violent or not, there's an economic cost, to that conflict. Either farmers lose their yield and output, or headers lose their animals. So it covers both violent and non-violent conflict.
Okay, super. Claire, is that okay for you?
Perfect, thank you so much.
Yeah, so I can see Esther's colleagues, Robert Mbeshe is here. The question for the presentation from JUCAT is the mention, Esther mentioned that wealthy households were likely to participate in this incentive-based opportunity. So I'm just wondering, were there, now that we know this intersection of climate and environment plus conflicts really has a diverse, it hits hard to the vulnerables. I was just wondering, what are those kind of opportunity costs or investment costs that would deter people to engage in this scheme?
And thank you very much for that question. My name is Robert. I can stand in for Esther, who was in the field and even actually tried to make the presentation. And I've already responded on the chat, is that to be able to participate on this program, households are expected to pay about $15 to be allocated about a half an acre of a forest plot. And forest plots are very fertile because of many years of not being utilized for agricultural production. And this is an area that many of the poorer households are not able to afford. So there is an opportunity for that identification of the much poorer households that are not able to pay this fee. But the other thing that we have observed is that households in the study area are more willing to pay for this participation in these programs through labor, which might increase their opportunities to participate and therefore benefit in these programs. So as you rightly pointed out, Mount Elgon area of Kenya is also another place, which has experienced episodic conflicts, again, attributed to resources. The more they know, the more poor are not included in benefiting from these programs, the more likely it is the situation that the conflicts might continue over a long period of time. So those are the opportunities we have picked, potentially that can increase the the more poor in engaging in these interventions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that clarification, and also for really standing in for Emily and showing the teamwork behind it. Thank you for that. Sorry, it was Esther. I just mixed up the names. Now to Emily, a question for you. How can you explain the link between weather patterns and illness? Is it linked to higher malaria incidence within the rainy weather? Was your data collected at national level? This is O'Reilly saying that I know that Uganda has a diverse weather pattern, with some regions having 2 rainy seasons per year, while others having only one. So any reflections on that, Emily?
All right, thank you so much for your question. Yeah, as you rightly indicate, yeah, Uganda, there are some places, especially in the north, where they have one main long season, you know, and the other parts have two bimodal type of rainfall. But then, yeah, of course, if you look at the months, it's almost the same number of, it's only that the other side of the north, it's one long period with a break, without a break in between, and this other side, they have a break in between. Otherwise, to answer the question on data set first, the data set was at national level because it is the Living Standard Measurement Survey. I considered both regions, all regions, the 4 regions of Uganda. And then the relationship between weather and health, of course, as I rightly indicated earlier, there are different pathways. Yeah, malaria, as you rightly say, yeah, is associated with high rainfall, or in the recent past, they have been saying that because of increases in temperature, it has also affected the distribution of vectors that are responsible for malaria. But then other pathways mostly will be through water. For instance, if there is a drought, there is a water scarcity. There is water scarcity, and sanitation and wash generally, sanitation and hygiene conditions are compromised, which might lead to these waterborne related diseases. And also high temperature, of course, yeah, if there is high temperature, there is foodborne related diseases. There are different pathways at play. But then, of course, what I presented is just part of what I'm doing, because now I go further. Currently, I'm going further to dig into the different pathways, and yeah, water availability, water scarcity, and the time burdens that individuals face when accessing water. I think they contribute so much to the health. And we all know, of course, water needs between men and women are also different. So in case of water shortage, women suffer more than men. So those are the things that I will be looking into further. Thank you. But then another pathway will also be through food security, because if there is drought, yeah, there is food insecurity, and then malnutrition. Yeah, malnutrition for different age groups, especially in children. Yeah, there is a linkage between drought and those undernutrition related issues. So, and yeah, I think they are so diverse, because even we find that women mostly, yeah, of course, biology also plays part, but if there is food insecurity, and women are supposed also to get some, you know, I don't know how to say it. Yeah, but there is nutritional needs of women are different from nutritional needs of men. So if there is food shortage and micronutrients in the different plants are also compromised, and we are unable to get the required nutrients, yeah, I mean, all those things result into illnesses.
Great. Thank you very much, Emily, on that. And just in line with, now that you're still on the spot, before I get to Dr. Ramya, would you please clarify your thinking or your reflection on one of your recommendations about having time poverty reduction strategies? Could you just mention one kind of time poverty reduction that is in line with your research, that a programmer would kind of visualize what it would mean, you know?
Oh, I get what you're it's kind of difficult anyway to identify, but of course we know women time poverty. Maybe if I could define time poverty, the time that one has on his for leisure, maybe after doing all the activities that you've done. So in my study, I try to argue out that because climate is related climate is affecting health, and women are caregivers of most of the household members. So the amount of time that they have for free is limited. Actually, they have so many things into their hands. So if there could be like sharing of these roles among men and women, a strategy like an intervention that will allow sharing of equal amount of activities between men and women, so that women are not so much affected when it comes to increased time burdens, perhaps that would help.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think these are those kind of very soft kind of results that then get a little bit sidelined, and they really contribute a lot into some of the policy discussions. For instance, the maternity leave discussions policy making discussions on how to engage time off for women. So yeah. I think it's something that is interesting. I found it interesting from your research that could be elaborated clearly for programmers or policy makers within health, or even within the labor part. Now, for Dr. Ramya, for you, just a quick reflection. As you're aware, we are gearing up to the food system summit, and your research really looks, I think it fits well into this, the action track 1 on the child diets. I'm just wondering, from where you stand, from all this kind of research that you've done, how do you see it being reflected very well in this action track 1, or in these dialogues as we move towards the food system summit? Sorry, it's a big, tall order, but I'm coming from the programming bit of view, so I really want to see how research works for programmers. Yeah.
Sure, and I think the whole framing around the conversation is more food systems. Food systems is not just to, like, provide nutrition or food security, but it's also like a source of employment and livelihood. And I think sort of shifting that thinking, or kind of thinking from that perspective, is also important. And we see that especially in Sundarbans. And I think Sundarbans is very complicated from the very little with the study that I understand, and Bhushan has done a lot more work there, is that all the spatial issues and temporal issues of like our whole world is condensed into Sundarbans. So using that as a way of, like, testing and building interventions and successfully is going to really inspire a lot more changes as we face climate change. But it is very I think we need to mentally think of the shift rather from it provides nutrition towards it provides livelihood, it provides employment.
Okay, great. I think this is a great kind of reflection as we get on with the dialogues towards this food system. So with that, I think we have a few more minutes, and I'll just, in line with that kind of questions from the question to Dr. Ramya. Now, to all the speakers, in just one, maybe one sentence, how do you plan, or how have you communicated your findings and implication of your research to program makers, policy makers, or communities? Just how are we moving this very lovely research that here in this academic nutrition week? How do you plan, and if you already moved it, could you share with us that reflection on how this research then moves to the next level of making change for people. Yeah. Just in one sentence, if you can. If you think like me in Swahili, you can say it in 3 sentences. Thank you. So maybe let's start with who is ready to start as we close. Ramya? Thank you.
Sure. So I think one, we're not trying to propose more research. We actually want to do more programmatic policy intervention. So we're really working with the team, and we're trying to convey. And the work that we present is the first step to say, hey, here's some evidence. Let's move this forward. So we really don't want to propose more research or anything. We just want to get to the grounds running. So I think my colleague, Upashana, who's the senior author, is also working on a number of different levels at the policy level. So I think our immediate next step is to just kind of move that forward.
Okay, great. Super. Mr. Fadari, any reflections on communicating, moving forward?
Okay, thank you. From the findings, we found that post-planting that is normally associated with lean season or reduced food consumption in the household is there. And post-harvest too is also associated with conflict. So we may have 2 seasons of inadequate food consumption within a cultural household. So moving forward, it's very important to look at these seasons and then not only target intervention towards post-planting or lean season of agriculture. There's also, because of conflict, there's also vulnerability during harvest season. And harvest season, post-harvest season. And this season also is in line with dry season and also triggers conflict. So more research should go into this direction to understand the vulnerability of agricultural household in post-harvest season. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so quickly, Emily and then Amaka, and we finalize with Esther is gone, but maybe the colleague. Yeah. So, Emily, okay. Quick one.
Yeah, way forward. Yeah, as I rightly indicate, my work is still in progress, but currently I'm still also working with some other partners in Uganda at Makerere University. So after doing all this work and what we are yet to continue with, of course, we are trying to see if there will be a possibility of like having a workshop or something related to that, so that this information or findings that we've gotten can be disseminated back to the communities on the best way how to, to improve their livelihood. So in a nutshell, yeah, that's it. But it also depends with how things will move.
Okay, great. Amaka, you're still there?
Oh yeah, I'm here. So my work is still work in progress. It's part of my thesis. I think the way forward would be to disseminate, findings of the determinants of conflict to throw more light on the plight of rural households, and hopefully, get policymakers to actually, implement policies that help the situation. Because in Nigeria right now, nothing is being done, unfortunately, but these conflicts are a serious problem. So hopefully findings of this research, and not just mine, and every other research on conflict would help spur the conversation in the right direction.
Super, great. Okay, so Esther is gone, and for that, I take it back to Lauren.
I can intervene for Esther.
Robert, sorry, I didn't see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, the activity that Esther reported is funded as part of a bigger project on social and ecological synergies on ecosystem-based conservation. And the funders had actually provided for resources for us to do what we are calling action learning with communities and policy makers, including the Kenya Forest Service, Kenya Forest Research Institute, and NGOs working in the space. And we had organized meetings in April this year where we really needed to have a conversation, not just from our findings, but also allowing other people to bring in what their understanding is. But the COVID situation didn't allow us to hold physical meetings. So we are hoping that the situation could improve and we could have physical meetings, because we thought perhaps that was going to be the way we thought could be most effective. But if not, we would see how possible to hold online meetings where we can brainstorm, share the findings, and possibly have a conversation that perhaps might change the situation going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert, and for closing that bit. So yes, we are heading now to the closing ceremony. Thank you so much, all the participants. Please put in your polling. There's a question there. Kindly click on it so that we are done. And thank you so much for your time that you've dedicated to listen to the speakers, to listen to all this very interesting research, and also to know that they are going to move there's plans to move it into programming and to policy making. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Brenda, for being such a fantastic chair for this session. I really appreciate that, and for dealing with all of the technical unexpected things that happened. And thank you to our speakers, as Brenda said, and everyone for your questions and participation. So please head over to the closing ceremony, and I hope you enjoyed ANH 2021. Hope to see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.